And for the second time that night, I didn't try to play hero. I didn't look back to see if he may be okay. I didn't do anything I always thought I'd do if I was faced with this kind of situation. All the daydreams I'd ever had about playing hero, winning the adoration of women nearby. Yeah, that shit went down the drain the second I watched a guy get his face torn off. I was busy running for my life. And then I heard a new group of feet running with me. "Oh, fuck!" I yelled as I realized I was being chased down like an animal. I turned to see not rotting corpses, but fresh bodies tearing after me. Blood oozing from every visible orifice, including ones I didn't particularly care to see. It would appear some were naked at the start of this. I turned back to face ahead of me, narrowly avoiding colliding with the sideways car against the barrier. My shoulder clipped the mirror anyway. The thing exploded off the vehicle and disappeared into the darkness behind me. I didn't stop to see where it landed. Honestly, I was starting to notice a pattern. The overpass stretched out ahead of me, littered with abandoned vehicles. As I mentioned, some had crashed into each other, and some looked like their owners had simply stopped driving and gotten out. One minivan sat with both sliding doors open. The inside looked dark. I wasn't about to check. The footsteps behind me kept getting closer. Not one, several. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Big mistake. One of them was about 20 feet back, close enough that I could see its face, or what was left of it. Blood ran from its mouth. Its eyes looked wrong, not white, not glowing, just vacant. Like nobody was home anymore. The thing stumbled over a chunk of concrete and nearly fell. For a brief, beautiful moment, I thought maybe that would slow them down. Then, two more ran around it. So much for that idea. I turned back around and kept running. My lungs felt like they were lined with sandpaper. Every breath hurt. My legs were screaming at me. I spent most of my adult life sitting behind a desk. Cardio wasn't exactly my thing. I made a mental note to survive this and start jogging, assuming there was still a world left to jog in. The overpass finally started sloping downward. I practically threw myself down the incline. Somewhere behind me, I heard metal crash, then a scream. Not a human scream, one of theirs. I didn't look. I wasn't making that mistake again. The city grew larger around me. Buildings, streetlights, storefronts, smoke. The smell hit me. Burning plastic, burning wood, burning things I didn't want to identify. Hardwick looked even worse from down here. Fires weren't scattered, they were everywhere. The sky glowed orange in every direction. I reached the bottom of the overpass and nearly got flattened by my own stupidity. A wrecked sedan blocked most of the road. I saw it at the last second and barely managed to vault over the hood. Something in my backpack shifted and smacked me in the spine. Probably the water. My $45 backpack was earning its keep. The footsteps were still there. Closer now. Much closer. I spotted a narrow alley between two brick buildings and changed direction immediately. No thought, no planning, just instinct. The alley was dark. The emergency lighting from nearby buildings reached inside, but barely. Trash bags lined the walls. Broken pallets. A shopping cart missing 2 wheels. The smell was unbelievable. And considering everything I'd smelled that night so far, that is saying something. I sprinted deeper into the alley. Dead end. Of course it was, because apparently God hated me. I skidded to a stop and looked around wildly. The footsteps were entering the alley. I could hear them, slapping against the pavement, getting louder, getting closer. Then I saw it. A dumpster. Not a magical solution, not a secret escape route. Just a dumpster. The lid stood slightly open. I don't know if you've ever climbed into a dumpster before. I hadn't. Never really made my bucket list. I grabbed the edge and hauled myself up. The smell nearly knocked me unconscious. Rotting food, spoiled milk, something that might have been fish. I landed inside and immediately regretted every life decision that had brought me to that moment. Then, I pulled the lid shut. Darkness. Complete darkness. I held my breath. The footsteps entered the alley seconds later. 1 pair, then another, then several more. I could hear them moving around outside, sniffing, growling, making these awful, wet noises. At one point, something slammed into the side of the dumpster hard enough to make the entire thing shake. I nearly screamed. Instead, I bit down on my sleeve. Not because I was smart, because panic makes you do weird things. The things lingered outside for what felt like forever. Maybe it was 5 minutes. Maybe it was 30 seconds. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. Eventually, the noises started moving away. One by one, the footsteps faded. The growling disappeared. The alley became quiet again. I stayed exactly where I was, curled up between garbage bags and spoiled food, sweating, shaking, trying not to breathe too loudly. For the second time that night, I found myself hiding from the end of the world. Only this time, I wasn't sitting safely inside my house, and I wasn't in a well-stocked gas station. I was hiding in a dumpster behind some random building in Hardwick. And the worst part? I was starting to think this might actually be one of my better ideas. I slowly lifted the lid of the dumpster. Painfully slow. I pulled myself out of the dumpster, pulling the backpack out after me. It fell off during the mad scramble. Of course, I couldn't stay in the dumpster for all eternity. that's not survival by any stretch. I looked back down the alley, out toward the street. Nothing moving, but I could hear the animalistic screams all around me, like some sort of horror game. The city felt different now. Back home, everything had been quiet, almost too quiet. Hardwick wasn't quiet. Hardwick was alive. Or maybe that wasn't the right word anymore. The screams came from every direction, some close, some far away. Occasionally, I'd hear glass break, metal crash. Once, I heard what sounded like a gunshot, then another, and then nothing. The silence afterward somehow felt worse. I adjusted the backpack and slowly made my way toward the mouth of the alley. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay hidden. Unfortunately, every instinct I had also screamed at me to stay inside my house earlier. Those instincts weren't exactly batting 1,000. The street beyond looked like a war zone. Burned out vehicles sat at odd angles. Storefronts had been shattered. Traffic lights blinked endlessly over empty intersections. The fires I'd seen from the overpass were now closer. Much closer. One building across the street was still actively burning. Flames poured from the second-story windows. Black smoke climbed into the night sky. Nobody was putting it out. Nobody was even watching. The world had apparently reached the point where a burning building wasn't worth anybody's attention anymore. I moved carefully along the sidewalk, stepping around broken glass, avoiding pools of blood, trying very hard not to look at certain things. You know, the normal apocalypse stuff. A city bus sat abandoned in the middle of an intersection. Half the windows had been shattered. The front door stood open. I could see movement inside. I immediately ducked behind a parked car. My heart nearly stopped. I just stayed there a few seconds before realizing the movement wasn't actually moving. It was just curtains. Somebody had curtains hanging inside bus windows. I had no idea why. The important thing is I nearly died of a heart attack because of public transportation. As I continued down the street, the destruction grew worse. Bodies became more common. Most looked like they had been running. Some had collapsed beside cars, others lay in crosswalks. One poor bastard looked like he made it all the way to a convenience store before dying right outside the entrance. I tried not to think about what happened to them. I really did. But it became harder the deeper I got into the city. The worst part wasn't the bodies. It was the evidence of people. A purse abandoned on a sidewalk. A grocery cart full of blood. A little kid's blanket at a bus stop. Somebody's entire life interrupted in the span of a few minutes. I found myself wondering where everybody went, then immediately regretted that decision because I was starting to learn the answer. A scream erupted nearby. Close. Very close. The sound wasn't human. Not anymore. It echoed between buildings before abruptly stopping. I waited. Nothing followed. Eventually, I started moving again, this time faster. An apartment building caught my attention because it looked normal. Not untouched, just normal. 4 stories, red brick, several windows still intact. No fire, no obvious signs of violence. Compared to everything else, it practically looked welcoming. I was halfway across the street when movement caught my eye. One of them, standing near a wrecked SUV. It wasn't looking at me. The thing stood perfectly still, its head tilted slightly to one side. I slowly backed behind a parked truck, my pulse hammered in my ears. The thing remained where it was, not moving, not reacting, just standing there. I don't know how long I watched it. Maybe 20 seconds, maybe a minute. Eventually, I realized something. It hadn't seen me yet. I carefully slipped around the truck and crossed toward the apartment building. Every step felt louder than the last. The front entrance stood slightly open. A small security door hung crooked on one hinge. I reached it, grabbed the handle, pulled. The metal groaned loudly, much louder than I would have liked. The thing near the SUV immediately turned. I saw its head snap toward me. Well, shit. I slipped through the opening and shoved the door behind me. The lobby sat beyond, in the darkness. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Mailboxes lined one wall. Most stood open, letters scattered across the floor. I stood there listening. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I glanced back through the glass. The thing outside had started to move. Slowly. Not yet running. Just walking toward the entrance. I turned away and headed deeper into the building. The lobby opened into a small sitting area with a couple couches and an old television mounted to the wall. The television still worked, sort of. Static flickered across the screen. The sound had been muted. Thank God. The last thing I needed was more static. I was halfway across the room when I heard something upstairs move. I froze. The sound came again. A floorboard. Then another. I looked around and saw a pocket knife laying on a table. I grabbed it, and my grip immediately tightened on the knife. Not because I thought it'd help, just because holding it made me feel slightly less helpless. A little face peeked around the second floor railing. I nearly had another heart attack. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. She immediately disappeared the second we made eye contact. I stared. The little head slowly reappeared and then disappeared again. I heard a woman's voice. "Honey, get back." The girl vanished. A few seconds later, a woman cautiously stepped into view. She looked exhausted. Her hair was a mess. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. She looked like somebody who hasn't slept all night, which was probably exactly what she was. She spotted the knife, then looked at me, then the knife again. That's fair. I slowly lowered it. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The woman didn't answer. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have believed me either. The little girl peeked around her leg, still holding a stuffed rabbit. One ear was missing. The rabbit, not the kid. just clarifying. The woman finally spoke. "You alone?" I nodded. "Yeah." A long silence followed. The little girl continued staring at me. Kids have no concept of subtlety. She was studying me like I was a zoo animal. I couldn't really blame her. I probably looked awful. Blood stained my clothes. Dumpster juice covered half my hoodie. I smelled like a landfill. Actually, I probably smelled worse than a landfill. The woman seemed to arrive at some decision because her shoulders relaxed slightly. Not much, just enough to notice. "You can come upstairs." I looked toward the entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see movement outside now. Shapes. More than one. My stomach dropped, and the woman quickly noticed. "Quickly." I didn't need to be told twice. I hurried toward the stairs. The little girl stepped aside to let me pass. Then, as quietly as anything, she looked up at me and asked, "Are those things ever gonna go away?" I wish I had a good answer. I just stared at her for a second and then followed her mother upstairs, because the truth was, I was starting to think they were here to stay.